Hey everyone, continuing on with my Hellboy coverage, this is the third video in my Hellboy series of videos covering the second short stories omnibus. So we're going to have a whole bunch of more short tales taking us from the year 1961 to 1993. So let's dive into it and see what more wacky adventures with the horrific twist that Hellboy goes on in this second short story volume. Hellboy, the Complete Short Stories Omnibus Volume 2, written by Mignola and art by various artists. In the previous Short Stories Omnibus Volume, we began in the year 1947, and we got up to 1961. We will be continuing from 1961 and working our way to 1993, which afterwards in 94 is when the Hellboy story starts in the current day. Our first story arc in this volume is The Hydra and the Lion. It is set in the year 1961. The artwork is by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. Hellboy travels to Alaska. There he learns that a former circus strongman named Stramo had died. This Stramo is a real nice fella. A man there tells Hellboy that this Stramo made him promise to put his proper name on his tombstone. Said he'd made a lot of enemies over the years and had to hide out and use made-up names. But now that he's dead, he wanted his proper name on his tombstone, and it appears like his proper name was Hercules. Hellboy asks, was he the real Hercules? The man answers, who knows? We had a nice little funeral for him. But then, as soon as the tombstone went up, monsters started haunting the area. So Hellboy goes out into the wilderness to hunt for these monsters. And while searching, he finds a little girl, and she is sitting atop a sleeping monster, and she is plucking out the teeth of the monster with pliers. Hellboy tells the little girl that she should probably go home. Is she trying to get herself killed? Where are her parents? The little girl answers, I'm from Kithaeron. You know where that is? You want to see my collection? The little girl then begins showing Hellboy her collection of fantastical objects. An iron feather, a bronze hoof, hair from a three-headed dog, a piece of a silver eggshell, and a half-golden apple, a stone that fell from the sky, and a drop of centaur's blood. She also has the tears of Princess Megara, shed for her murdered sons. Hellboy insists that the little girl go home. This is no place for her. The little girl responds that she's half lion, and she can prove it. The little girl then roars loudly like a lion would. She roars so loud that she wakes up the monster that was sleeping. So now Hellboy has to fight this monster. Hellboy punches the monster, breaking its jaw, and the monster's head splits in two, revealing it to be a Hydra. Hellboy hits the monster some more, and the two heads become three, and all of a sudden, Hellboy is outnumbered, and he is tangled up in the monster's various heads. And while Hellboy is fighting this Hydra, somehow a lion appears. Perhaps it was the little girl transformed? The lion attacks the Hydra, and then it disappears. Hellboy, he manages to take the Hydra's three heads and tangle them together, tying them up and subduing the monster. Afterwards, Hellboy reports back to BPRD headquarters in Connecticut. Trevor Broom and another professor there speculate on what happened on this mission, and who was the identity of this mysterious girl that potentially turned into a lion. Professor Broom explains that Hercules killed the thespian lion in the woods of Kithaeron, which is where the girl said she was from, and then Hercules wore the lion's skin for the rest of his life. Hellboy, he finds it hard to believe that the little girl was the ghost of Hercules' lion skin. Broom continues, suggesting another theory. He says, you know, she referred to a Megara, who was Hercules' wife. Hercules killed his wife and sons while driven mad by Hera. The feathers, apples, and hooves refer to the labors of Hercules, but his first labor undertaken to atone for the murders was to slay the Nemean lion. I think it's most likely that this little girl was actually a physical manifestation of Hercules' unresolved guilt. Hellboy, he still can't believe this. He smacks his head and goes, "Oi!" And the story ends with the ghostly lion sitting before Hercules' tombstone. Our next short story, taking place in Norway in 1963, is called The Troll Witch. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. The year is 1963. Over in Norway, Hellboy is investigating a number of gruesome murders, apparently done by a whole bunch of trolls. Hellboy's lead is a house in the area that all the villagers told him to check out. Inside the house is a witch, a troll-like looking witch. The witch asks Hellboy, "Have you come to kill me?" Hellboy answers, "Maybe." The townspeople told Hellboy that trolls were responsible for the killings, so they sent Hellboy to the witch. The witch, she then tells Hellboy her story. Once upon a time, there was a woman who could bear no children. So she asked a witch for help. The witch gave the woman 2 flowers, but told her to only eat one, and she would have a child. So the woman did so, and she had a beautiful baby girl. But the woman really wanted to give her husband a son, so she ate the second flower, and the second daughter was ugly, stunted, and troll-like. Years passed, and the beautiful sister became more beautiful, and the ugly sister more dreadful. The parents contemplated killing their troll-like daughter, but their beautiful daughter loved her sister so much, so they could do nothing. Years later, trolls were fighting outside of their home. The mother told her girls, "It's the trolls, come to hold their Yule celebration. Leave them be and no harm will come from it." The ugly girl, though, she just couldn't let it go, so she went outside to fight these trolls. The beautiful sister, she stayed inside the home, but she looked out the window, sticking out her head to see what was happening, and a troll happened to grab off her head and put a cow's head in its place, and then the beautiful sister turned into a cow. This really angered the ugly sister, so she traveled to the troll fortress, and she killed many trolls there, and she stole her beautiful sister's normal head back. Hellboy interrupts the witch's story and says, "And she killed a pile of trolls, got her sister's head back, and her sister turned back into a person and married a prince or something, right? I've heard this story." The witch tells Hellboy, "No, that's just a fairy tale. She lived and died a cow, and her bones are still there in that fortress." But the ugly sister did bring back her head. It is then revealed that the ugly sister is the same witch that Hellboy is talking to now, and she still has the beautiful sister's dried out head in her home there, sitting on a shelf. The witch tells Hellboy, "Someday a woman who is wanting children will come to me, and I will give her these flowers to eat, and her children will be beautiful, not trollish." "Ah, but you want these murdering trolls everyone is talking about. They are abroad tonight, but must be underground before morning. They come and go by a certain cave I know. You can go there before them. Take this. In the wood is the sound of their breaking bones. Lay it at the entrance of that cave. They will not dare to cross over it, and when the sun rises and finds them, they will turn to stone." So the witch, she gives Hellboy this weapon, the very same weapon she used all those years ago to kill another set of trolls. So Hellboy, he takes that weapon and he goes to the cave and he deals with those trolls for the townspeople. Our next short story is The Baba Yaga. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is the story of the first confrontation between Hellboy and Baba Yaga. These events were briefly mentioned in the Wake the Devil story arc, and it will explain how Baba Yaga lost her eye. The year is 1964. Hellboy travels to Russia to put a stop to a whole bunch of child abductions that are happening here. Hellboy, he goes to a cemetery where every year Baba Yaga comes to count dead men's fingers. Hellboy, when he sees Baba Yaga, he attacks her. He has to put a stop to these child abductions. Baba Yaga fights back. Eventually, Hellboy, with his gun, blasts Baba Yaga in her head, specifically her eye being blown clean off. And then Baba Yaga seemingly dies. Although Baba Yaga can never really die, she has just left our world. Some talking animals discuss the supposed potential death of Baba Yaga. A bird comments, "Baba Yaga is dead. I flew past the place where the chicken leg house had stood. Today it's gone. In its place is left only a fence of old skulls and a pool of blood." A frog replies, "But she cannot be dead." A bear, he tells the other group of animals, "No, she's gone, far away, but do not be afraid. Are not her iron teeth and wooden legs this country's bones? Do we not eat her food and breathe her air? She is our mother, and can never die so long as Russia endures." So apparently as long as Russia continues to exist, Baba Yaga can never die, at least according to this legend. That year, when Baba Yaga passed on to the other world, spring did not come to the village there in Russia, and for 1 year every child born in that particular village was blind in one eye, and the old people who knew things were heard to say that Baba Yaga's reach is long. Our next story arc is called The Sleeping and the Dead. It is set in the year 1966. Artwork by Scott Hampton, colors by Dave Stewart. The year is 1966. Hellboy is in England at a place called the Beehive Inn. There, Hellboy is watching over a vampire woman who is making her way through the inn, sucking the blood of innocents. Hellboy had a local he met be vampire bait for him, said that he would square the man's bill if he obliged. The man did, acting as bait, lying in bed waiting for the vampire to attack him. And sure enough, she did. And Hellboy blasted her with his gun, and she fell out the window. Hellboy tells the man that helped him that if he's not back in an hour, to give some of his fellow agents a phone call. Hellboy, he then jumps out the window and continues trying to follow the vampire woman. He wants to make sure she dies. Hellboy, he finds the vampire woman lying on the ground, and an old man is standing over her. The man tells Hellboy, "What have you done?" Hellboy assumes that the man is an innocent, so he tries to warn the man to stay away from that woman. But then the old man surprises Hellboy and shoots him. Hellboy, after a short while, manages to wake up from being shot, and he follows a trail of blood, and it leads him inside a nearby house. The vampire woman there is dead. The old man tells Hellboy, "Too late. You have no idea what you've done." The old man then questions Hellboy, "How much do you know about vampires? And I don't mean those ragged creatures you have there in America. I mean the European vampires. All your years doing this, how many of those have you seen? Not many, am I right? Doesn't that seem strange? Well, all over Europe in the 16th and 17th century, there was a proper vampire epidemic. Thousands of cases recorded, books written on the subject by doctors, rational men. The problem was debated in universities in Vienna, Paris, and Moscow. Whole cemeteries exhumed, vampire hunting perfected almost to a science. But then in 1774, almost all reports of vampires in Europe stopped. Because in that year, the heads of the great vampire families met and agreed that in order to survive, they would hide themselves. They would continue to swell their ranks and make new vampires, but do so discreetly. And from that day forth, all new-made vampires would be left sleeping in their graves, waiting for hundreds of years from that night. By then, they will assume that reasoned men will have ceased to believe in them, will have forgotten how to defend against them. Then the vampires will wake and loose their armies on the world. Hellboy asks, "That's a hell of a story. How do you know all that?" The old man then goes into a long-winded story about vampires. Apparently in the year 1882, a vampire literally arrived at their doorstep. And that older gentleman vampire enslaved him and turned his sister and tortured his other sister. The old man also explains that this dead woman here was in fact his sister. And he believes that the older vampire that made her is going to be very angry when he learns that she is dead. I mean, what's gonna happen when he realizes she's not coming home to him? All those buried out there, they all belong to him, and he can wake them anytime he pleases. He swore not to leave them till the time they all agreed upon, but what might he do in a rage? Hellboy asks, where is this older vampire guy now? The old man tells Hellboy, down at the end of the hall, you'll find stairs that lead down to the cellar. You can find him down there. As Hellboy begins walking to this cellar to confront this older vampire, the old man triggers a trapdoor and Hellboy falls down below. As Hellboy he's wandering down in this underground area, a phone rings. Hellboy he answers it. On the phone is the old man. The old man tells Hellboy, I'm sorry. Hellboy asks, what the hell do you think you're doing? Get me out of here. The old man continues, Mary, what did they do to you? What they made you into? Not a vampire, something else. Mary is apparently this old man's other sister. The old man continues, I couldn't stop them, and now she has to be locked away down there, and she has to be fed. I'm sorry. The old man then hangs up. Hellboy, he continues walking. He comments to himself, well, this just gets better and better. Hellboy, he walks and he eventually finds this little girl, Mary. Mary is humming a creepy song and Hellboy is trying to talk with her. And eventually, Mary turns into a scary-looking ghoul and she attacks Hellboy. So Hellboy and this Mary are fighting in the space beneath the house. While this is going on, two BPRD agents meet up with the man from the inn that was helping out Hellboy earlier in the story. So that man and the two BPRD agents are slowly approaching the house where Hellboy is. They are going to be his backup. Hellboy, still beneath the house, is continuing to fight the sister. Meanwhile, in another section of the house, the older master vampire arises from his grave, and he has just learned that his love has been killed by Hellboy. The old man, talking to the master vampire, says, Master, forgive me. The older master vampire, infuriated, decides to wake up the many sleeping vampires he has quietly been creating around the house and stockpiling for a generation. So, all of a sudden, outside of the house, as the BPRD agents are closing in, the sleeping dead begin to rise from their graves. And these freshly awoken European vampires begin attacking the BPRD agents outside. Back underneath the house, Hellboy is still fighting this creature who was once the little girl. Hellboy, he punches her right through a wall. And apparently, by breaking the wall, he has freed this vampire girl that Hellboy was attacking from the hold that the master vampire had over her. So the sister, now reverted to a ghost version of the little girl, walks over to the master vampire. The master vampire is not happy to see her. He yells, Creature, you dare set foot here? Back to your stinking hole. The little girl, no longer having to obey her master's wishes, grows large in size, and she grabs the master vampire, and she squeezes his neck and pops his head right off, finally killing him. At that exact moment, the BPRD agents were trying to fend themselves off from all of these freshly arisen vampires. But things were not looking well. They were yelling, we're dead, we're dead. But as soon as the master vampire died below, all of these other vampires on the surface immediately die as well. And the BPRD agents, upon realizing they're going to be okay, comment, What the hell? I guess we're alright then. And in the basement, with the master vampire now dead, the spirit of the girl releases all the evil she has held in. And then, once she has done that, her corpse crumbles to the ground, finally at peace. Once everything is over, Hellboy stumbles out of the house and finds the BPRD agents there that came to give him backup. And then they all go to a bar and drink and celebrate a job well done. Our next short story is called Heads, art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. It is set in the year 1967. In the year 1967, Hellboy traveled to Kyoto, Japan. He was investigating rumors of a so-called evil house that was located near a lake, where apparently something terrible happened that drove the population away and caused the village to turn to ruin. Rumor has it that demons live in the house. Hellboy was sleeping on the road in the woods nearby one night, and he was awoken by a local man. The local man tells Hellboy, "You can't sleep here, it's too dangerous. Bad things in the woods at night. You come and stay at my house, okay?" Hellboy responded, "Sure, why not?" The man tells Hellboy, "Very, very safe. I have other guests tonight. They will be happy to see you." This local man is apparently the owner of the supposed evil house that Hellboy was here to investigate. So the owner of the house shows Hellboy his home, and then he introduces Hellboy to the other guests. The owner tells Hellboy, "See, here are my other guests, just travelers like you, good people. Mr. Lou, he tells very funny stories." So this guest, Mr. Lou, tells his supposed funny story. He says, "Maybe you know this one. A farmer met a ghost woman, and she gave him a golden box, but said, 'You must never open this.' He took it home and hid it from his wife, but one day she found it and looked inside. It was full of gouged out human eyes, and at that moment, the farmer dropped dead in his field. The wife went mad and lived the rest of her days like an animal. The end." The other house guests all laugh. Not Hellboy, though, as that story was not funny at all, and it was pretty messed up. Hellboy just responded, "Wow, that is a funny story. You know, I just realized I'm awfully tired. I'm gonna go to bed." The owner of the house then shows Hellboy to the room where he will be sleeping for the night. And later on that night, because Hellboy is mistrusting of the owner and the guests, he waits until the house is quieted down, and then he draws his gun and begins his investigations. So Hellboy, he searches the house, and he finds 6 headless bodies, those of the homeowner and his guests. The bodies are completely cleanly cut, and they are in a sitting position, and there is not a drop of blood in the area. Hellboy, of course, suspects supernatural powers at play. Hellboy, he drags all of these bodies outside. He ties them all together with rope, and then he ties the other end of that rope to a stone lantern, and then he throws that all into the lake so they sink to the bottom. Hellboy, he now starts searching for the heads of those bodies. Hellboy then hears whispering coming from the woods. He goes to check it out, and he finds the matching heads that would connect to those bodies. It turns out the homeowner and all of the guests are all demons, and they were hoping to eat Hellboy. But once the homeowner and the guests realize that their bodies have been taken, they start freaking out. They're panicking. They're in fear that they're not going to be able to reconnect their bodies to their heads before sunrise. Why they decided to separate their heads from their bodies in the first place, I do not know. But the heads that are now floating begin trying to attack Hellboy and make him talk. They want to know where their bodies are. But Hellboy, he just fends them off, swinging at them with a branch, saying, "Batter up, heads!" The floating demon heads continue trying to attack Hellboy, but he manages to fend them off until sunrise, and when the sun does rise, it destroys them, and they turn to dust. And with that, another successful Hellboy mission into the investigation of the evil house in Japan. Our next story is Goodbye, Mister Tod. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1979. So in the year 1979, Hellboy travels to Portland, Oregon. He is here because a woman phoned the BPRD to ask for help. Hellboy arrives at the home of a man named Mister Tod. Mr. Tod was a semi-popular psychic medium. However, he had fallen on hard times and had relied on drugs to start helping him get through his trances. And this time, things went a little haywire. Hellboy enters the building where Mr. Tod is, and he sees his assistant there, named Mary Ann Glozek. Mary Ann was the one that phoned the BPRD for help. She explains the situation to Hellboy, and then she takes Hellboy over to Mr. Tod. Mr. Tod, he went into one of his trances, but he did not contact the regular spirit world he usually does. He instead contacted something else entirely. And whatever this thing he contacted appears to be some sort of tentacled being. And it's manifesting through some sort of ectoplasm from Mr. Tod. Hellboy tells Marianne, "This thing's so damn big it sucked your boss dry. Lucky for us, there wasn't enough juice in him for this thing to form completely. And now it's stuck. We've got to drive it back through your boss and back to wherever it came from." Marianne, concerned, questions, "Then Mr. Tod will be okay?" Hellboy answers, "Well, I don't know about that, but I've got something, somewhere." Hellboy, he pulls out some sort of herb called arbutus. It is apparently a herb the ancient Greeks and Romans used to chase away evil and protect small children. So Hellboy is about to light this herb when all of a sudden, the tentacled being in the room grabs Hellboy and starts sucking Hellboy into it. As Hellboy's being pulled back, he tells Marianne, "Quick, light this stuff." Marianne, she does. She lights the herb, and the tentacle being begins to subside, and it gets sucked back into Mr. Tod's body. And Hellboy, he is dropped to the floor safely. Mr. Tod, he stands up and is a bloated mess. The assistant, Marianne, is worried that her boss doesn't look well. And sure enough, Mr. Tod's body swells with this creature inside of it, and his body just explodes. Ectoplasm shooting everywhere. He's dead. Hellboy says, "Geez, you never see something like that coming. Sorry about your boss. There was nothing we could do for him, but we did get rid of that creature, and that's the important thing, right?" Marianne answers, I guess. Well, after that somewhat sort of successful mission, we move on to our next story arc called The Vârcolac. This story is set in the year 1982. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. In the year 1982, Hellboy is in Yorkshire. He enters an abandoned castle there. Inside the castle, he finds what appears to be a dead body in a coffin. It is the coffin of a Countess Ilona Kokoski. Hellboy opens the coffin and has a wooden stake in his hand. He is preparing to impale the woman inside, who is a vampire. However, just at that moment as Hellboy is about to stake the woman, the floor gives way, and he plunges to the depths below. I laugh because if you watched my Volume 1 Omnibus video, I pointed out that the floor breaking was some sort of trope in Mike Mignola's Hellboy comics, and it happened 4 times in that first Omnibus, and here we have it happening again. Hellboy, once he lands in the depths below, he is standing before a group of coffins. And before you know it, a large group of ghouls try and grab Hellboy. They are eerily saying, "Stay with us. Yes, stay." Hellboy is eventually pulled up to the surface, though, being carried by a swarm of bats. Once Hellboy is on the surface, he sees the Countess there, and he tells her, "Okay, lady, that's enough of that." The Countess replies, "Bah! How can you even speak? Look, all of you, the Vârcolac is nearly upon us. Have you ever seen his like before?" He is so great in size that he eats the moon. He is the king of all my kind, all vampire, living and dead. He will destroy you completely. He will tear you to pieces and grind you into dust, not for what you are, but for what you could be and are not. The Vârcolac, this massive creature in the distance, scoops up Hellboy with his massive hand. And just as he is about to kill Hellboy, all of a sudden Hellboy wakes up, and Hellboy is back, standing over the coffin of Countess Ilona Kokoski. She put Hellboy in some sort of trance-like dream state, as she was trying to protect herself. Hellboy, now awake again and snapped out of her trance, says, "Damn, you son of a... You put the whammy on me!" The Countess tells Hellboy, "Wait!" But Hellboy finally drives the stake through her heart and kills her, and he tells her, "How's that?" The next short story is The Vampire of Prague. Art by P. Craig Russell, colors by Lovern Kindzierski. This is set in the year 1982. In Prague, there was legend of a vampire who lived there who was a gambler. Before he was a vampire, he was just a man who lived during the time of the plague. And he loved cards so much, but as people started dying during the plague, he was so desperate to continue to play that out of his desperation, he struck up a game with the dead. And for that offense, he was cursed. And to this day, each night he wanders that city, seeking victims. It is said that if he can be beaten at his card game, his soul will be set free. But any who plays against him and loses, he will kill. And due to this curse, he lives on as a vampire, trying to still find yet more victims to play cards against him. So in the year 1982, Hellboy is in Prague, trying to find this vampire. He enters the vampire's lair. Hellboy decides to toss a grenade to take the vampire down. Although Hellboy he mixed up which grenade he was supposed to use. He meant to use a smaller one, instead he accidentally used a bigger one that can destroy buildings. Oh well, Hellboy used the building-destroying grenade and he made quite a mess. In the resulting rubble and destruction, Hellboy finally sees the vampire he was here to kill. That vampire is still alive, and he attacks Hellboy. He begins to choke him, and the two of them start fighting across the city, fighting across various rooftops and buildings until eventually the pair crash through the glass at a marionette shop. Inside that marionette shop, Hellboy grabs a piece of the glass that broke and beheads the vampire with it. Hellboy he assumes the vampire dead, and he untangles himself from some marionette strings he got caught in. And as he untangles himself, 5 small cards tumble out of the puppet's sleeve. Hellboy grabs the cards and looks at them. And then he notices in the distance that the vampire, even though he's now headless, seems to be still alive. Hellboy chases after the vampire. The vampire turns into a bat and flies away. However, as he flies away, he leaves the contents of his pockets behind, including 5 cards. Hellboy, he looks at the 5 cards that the vampire left behind. There's a 3, 4, 5, 6, all of spades, and a 7 of hearts. So, the vampire has a straight. Not a straight flush though, one of them was a heart. In poker, this is still a fairly strong hand. But Hellboy, he looks at the 5 cards that he has, that he got from the marionette shop. And he's got 3 2s and 2 aces. He's got a full house. And a full house beats a straight in poker. And as the sun rises, the Vampire of Prague is destroyed by the sunlight, finally having lost a hand of cards. The next short story is called The Bride of Hell. Art by Richard Corbin, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1985. An American tourist woman named Teresa Cipriano traveled to France, and then she went missing. She has been missing for 6 days. Her father phoned the BPRD for help, and Hellboy was sent to France to try and find her. And when Hellboy does find her, he sees her lying in a field on a stone slab with men in black robes surrounding her. The men in black robes are chanting all sorts of satanic words. As the ritual comes to a climax, Hellboy emerges from the shadows to try and save her. But he accidentally steps in a bear trap. Hellboy, he swears, "Son of a," and then he tries to remove his leg from the trap. Meanwhile, a demon with wings flies into the clearing and grabs Teresa and attempts to take off with her. Hellboy, though, he finally removed the bear trap, he shoots at the demon in the sky, and Teresa falls and Hellboy catches her. Hellboy then begins running with Teresa. He runs, and he is trying to get away from the demons and the men in the black robes by cutting through the woods. Eventually, Hellboy stumbles upon some holy ruins of a church dedicated to a Saint Hagen. Hellboy in this holy clearing seems to be safe from the demon and the others. They seem to not dare step foot here. Also in the ruins of this church is a monk just sitting there. The monk strikes up a conversation with Hellboy. He asks Hellboy if he knows of the legend of Saint Hagen, who is the man depicted in the statue here, the one with the headless man holding a head. Hellboy, he vaguely knows the story, but the monk fills him in anyway. So the legend of Saint Hagen. In the year 1291, Hagen Douglas was captured by the Mamelukes outside the city of Acre during the Crusades. They tortured him, killed him, and cut off his head, and sent him back to the defenders of the city so that they would lose hope, for he was a great captain and loved by his men. Hagen was so favored by God and so loved by his men that at the last battle for the city, he rose up from the dead, headless, and fought beside his men. They still lost the battle, but 47 knights witnessed this miracle, and they scattered and escaped, and they founded the Order of the Knights of Saint Hagen. After they finished their conversation, Hellboy tells the monk that he's gonna go back out there and try to fight and kill that demon. The girl, Teresa Cipriano, she is still passed out, sleeping. The monk says that she will be safe here, like a little child. No harm can come to an innocent in this holy place. The devil does not dare set foot in here. He was only able to kill the others when they strayed outside. She will be safe if you leave her here, and if you do not kill the creature now, will you not have to run the risk of it when you take her from here anyway? The creature you saw is old, and it cannot leave its lair during the daylight hours, and in those hours it is weak. Its lair must be nearby, so at all times it can gloat over this rune, and if you hurt it, there should be some sign. So, Hellboy, he leaves the girl with the monk and sets out to kill this demon he saw earlier. He tracks the demon to its lair by following its blood. Hellboy goes inside the demon's lair and eventually finds the demon. The demon tells Hellboy, "What did you think to find, half-breed? You know what I am. No goblin, imp, or lesser spirit. I am Asmodeus." The story then cuts away and goes back to the monk. The monk, he decides to speak to the sleeping girl, and he tells her about King Solomon and the demon Asmodeus, the one that is in the lair. So this King Solomon, he wanted to build a temple, but apparently God forbade that any iron tools be used in the building of this temple. God's a stickler for those kind of things, you know. So Solomon had heard of a worm called the Shamir that had the power to split and shape stone. So King Solomon conjured up demons and asked them where he could find this Shamir. The demons did not know, but they said that their king, Asmodeus, would know. So King Solomon sent his best warrior into the kingdom of darkness to try and find this Asmodeus, and that man did. And the warrior tricked Asmodeus into drinking wine and got him drunk, and then clapped some chains on him. And every link on those chains were carved with the secret name of God, making that demon powerless. And the warrior marched the demon Asmodeus right back to Jerusalem and brought him before King Solomon. King Solomon asked this Asmodeus about this worm that could cut and shape stone. Normally, Asmodeus would never answer King Solomon, but King Solomon had some sort of magic ring that gave him power over Asmodeus. King Solomon bossed around Asmodeus for a while and forced Asmodeus to reveal secrets about himself. But one day King Solomon grew careless, and Asmodeus managed to get the magic ring from Solomon. And with that, the demon Asmodeus had power once again. And Asmodeus took Solomon and hurled him into the desert. And then Asmodeus made himself king of Jerusalem, and for 3 years he ruled the place. Although ruling was boring and tedious and annoying, Asmodeus grew tired of it. And after those 3 years, when King Solomon came back, Asmodeus gave up the throne and was happy to do so, and made King Solomon king again. Afterward, Asmodeus retreated into the desert. In the desert, eventually some men found him, and they prayed to him. They were probably devil worshippers, and they were willing to do whatever Asmodeus wanted. Asmodeus had them build a house for him, and then he spent his days there in intelligent conversation, and in the evenings he enjoyed the company of many women. Not slaves, though. They were his wives. Asmodeus was content there for many years, but after many years, the Knights of St. Hagen, well, they were going around doing the Lord's work and fighting and killing any evil and demons they could find, and eventually they found Asmodeus, and they killed his many wives. So Asmodeus, he took his revenge and killed those men. So that is the story of Asmodeus. And as the monk was reciting that story to the woman, in his lair, the demon Asmodeus was also telling the very same story to Hellboy. Hellboy, hearing the tale, says it is probably fair that Asmodeus killed those men, but still, it's not right that Asmodeus would continue to steal more women and kidnap them. Hellboy looks around and sees a whole bunch of skulls and says, a lot of women. Women like Teresa Cipriano. Asmodeus corrects Hellboy, though. He says, steal? Last night you were the thief. In all my years, I've never taken any woman by force. They give themselves to me. Didn't you see that Teresa wore my sign? So it turns out that Teresa was not kidnapped. She was a devil worshipper, and she gave herself over to Asmodeus willingly to be his bride. And she is not so innocent. We jump back over to the monk in the clearing. Teresa finally wakes up. The monk tells her, have no fear, daughter, you are safe in the house of the Lord. Teresa just goes into a rage, though. She screams, Asmodeus, my king, my husband, is 1,000 times better than your stupid god, old man. He will bust you up. He'll squash you like a bug. The monk, a little bit saddened, replies, here's a sad turn of events. This is sanctuary, and no child of God shall fear any evil in this place. The monk then disappears, and then a skeletal warrior rises from a tomb at the church, and he continues the monk's sentence and says, but beware, for likewise no thing of evil shall enter into this place and live. Back in the demon's lair, Hellboy fights and eventually defeats Asmodeus. And then Hellboy hears screaming and he runs back over to Teresa. And when he arrives there, he sees the skeletal warrior has killed her. The skeletal warrior tells Hellboy she was a bride of hell. Commend her to the pit to service her master forever. The skeletal warrior then crumbles to dust. Hellboy exclaims, damn. Our next short story is The Whittier Legacy, art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1985. In Boston, Massachusetts, a skull, once the property of the notorious Whittier family of Providence, Rhode Island, believed to have been used in occult ceremonies, well, the skull is stolen from a locked cabinet at Boston University. Also at that university, a professor, Emil Stoop, went missing. And in a nearby church graveyard, 3 bodies belonging to the Whittier family have been dug up and removed. And because of all these events, the BPRD and Hellboy have been called in. Hellboy arrives in Boston, and he eventually manages to investigate this house where Emil Stoop is. Emil has the skull used in various Whittier family rituals, and he also has the 3 dead bodies from the Whittier family. Hellboy sees that Professor Stoop is about to light a candle and begin some sort of ritual. He tells him, "Don't do it." Stoop to this responds, "You don't understand. You think I'm Emil Stoop, but I'm not. I found letters between my mother and her brother, and they proved it. What I've suspected all these years. The man I thought was my real father is not. My real father was a Whittier. I am a Whittier." Some of the dead bodies in the room, now alive, say, "It's true, he is." Emil continues, "The Whittiers had vision. They had power to look beyond our common geometry, and that's what I want. I'm entitled to it." So Emil, he lights the candles, and he begins chanting some demonic stuff, trying to contact forces from beyond. Forces that the Whittier family used to call. So as the professor is floating in the air and trying to summon these forces, Hellboy talks to the other dead bodies there of the Whittier family members. One of those dead family members tells Hellboy, "It's true, we did commune with the spirits, but they are alien and dangerous, and we always wore these medallions for protection. Does the professor have one of these medallions?" Hellboy answers, "I don't think so." The dead ghoul responds, "Oh, well, that's gonna be a problem." Professor Stoop then becomes possessed by the creatures from beyond that he summoned, and he begins to transform. Hellboy tries to shake the professor and make him snap out of it. He tells him, "Hey, Emil, cut it out. You're making these dead people nervous." Stuff in the room starts going crazy. The professor turns into a monster. A green force field is emanating throughout the house. Hellboy is not exactly sure what to do, but then he gets an idea. He asks one of the dead ghouls there if he can borrow one of their medallions. They give it to him, and Hellboy chucks it at the professor. And all of a sudden, once the medallion hits the professor, he turns back into his normal human form. Hellboy then tells him, "I warned you." The professor asks, "What did you do?" And then he crumbles to dust and dies. Well, another job well done. All Hellboy had to do was throw this medallion at the summoned creature. Hellboy talks to the ghoul there and says, "Why can't they all be that easy? That's what I want to know." Our next short story is Buster Oakley Gets His Wish. Art, colors, and letters by Kevin Nolan. The story is still set in the year 1985. In Kansas, a teenager named Buster Oakley is with his friends. He is reciting some demonic passages from a book, trying to get demons to come and visit him and his friends. All of a sudden, a bright flash of light engulfs them from the sky, and they disappear in a flash. Later on, Hellboy comes to check in on things. He is not here to investigate anything to do with the kids. He's actually just here to investigate some cow disappearances. Hellboy talks to a farmer, and the farmer tells Hellboy they lost 5 cows last month. They just up and disappeared, and they lost 4 more now this morning. Hellboy, seeing a dead cow zapped in half, says, "You mean 3.5?" The farmer gets very emotional. He says, "You think that's funny? You laughing at me? 'Cause I'll tell you right now, fella, I'm in no mood for that. I'll tell you right now, it's those damn kids that are responsible for this. Kids around here these days all hopped up on the dope and that rock and roll music. You gotta be at least half crazy to listen to that noise." The farmer then sheds a tear and says, "Ugh, my poor goddamn cows." Later on, Hellboy does a little investigating. He is checking out the farm late at night, and as he is wandering the farm, he gets sucked into a giant spaceship, piloted by aliens. Once he is inside the spaceship, he sees all these mutated livestock everywhere. These are all the animals that have gone missing recently. As Hellboy is checking all the various mutated animals here, he eventually finds Buster Oakley's clothing. We can recognize it by the glasses and the red shirt with the odd symbols on it. And near that clothing, we see some sort of hybrid cowman. It turns out that Buster Oakley has been turned into this cow. Before Hellboy can do anything about this, the aliens come and they start poking and prodding at Hellboy. Eventually, Hellboy starts swinging and shoves them off of him. Hellboy then frees Buster Oakley, the teenager-turned-cow-man, from the chamber he was in. And Buster the cow and Hellboy start fighting off all these aliens. And eventually, once the aliens get worn down, they release Hellboy and Buster Oakley back down to the Earth. Once they get down on the Earth, Buster runs off and Hellboy could no longer find him. Later on, we see Buster Oakley, still the cow man, has found a new group of teenagers, and they are continuing to pray to these demons to try to summon them down to Earth. And Buster seems to have been accepted by their group as some sort of proof of demonic forces from beyond. Next short story is They Go Down to the Sea in Ships. Story by Mike Mignola and Joshua Dysart. Art by Jason Sean Alexander. Colors by Dave Stewart. Letters by Clem Robbins. In the 1700s, the pirate known as Blackbeard was terrorizing the seas, until finally in the year 1718 he died, getting shot multiple times, and getting his head cut right off. Blackbeard's head was then brought to Virginia, where the lieutenant that killed Blackbeard collected a bounty. Blackbeard's head was then stolen by a friend of his, who then lined the head with silver and turned it into a drinking chalice, where people would pour booze down Blackbeard's mouth and drink out the other end. As the years went on, Blackbeard's head found its way to various pub shelves, until eventually making its way into private collections, where people would still continue to drink from it. And it eventually wound up at an antique shop in Massachusetts in 1986, which is where our story begins in this issue. A psychic named Mark Arrow enters an antique store to get out of the rain. Mark in that antique store happens to come across the skull chalice of Blackbeard, and Mark, being a psychic, he feels a presence within it. He asks the store owner if he can buy it from him. The store owner asks for $218 for it. Mark, he doesn't have that kind of money though, but he needs this skull. So Mark, he brutally kills the store owner and takes it. A few days later, the owner of that antique store, well, he was dead, but his ghost ratted out on Mark Arrow to a medium in Florida, and the medium called the BPRD. And then Hellboy and Abe Sapien were dispatched to retrieve this skull, and also avenge the death of the antique store owner. Hellboy and Abe Sapien travel to North Carolina on the trail of this head. Abe is on a beach at high tide. Meanwhile, Hellboy is in a boat, talking to a local historian named Earl Reeds. Earl Reeds tells Hellboy all about the head of Blackbeard. Meanwhile, elsewhere in North Carolina on the water, also on a boat, is Mark Arrow, the psychic that stole the head of Blackbeard. He is with another man named Whitey Pacelli. They are rowing that boat to somewhere where Blackbeard may have buried some treasure. Blackbeard has made some sort of deal with Mark and Whitey. He wants his head returned to his body, and in exchange he will give them some of his buried treasure. Mark and Whitey, they eventually arrive at Blackbeard's body. Blackbeard's body, even though it's dead and headless, is standing and walking towards them. Mark, he starts walking over to do the exchange, but Whitey tells Mark, give me the head, I want to hold it. Mark replies, no, it's mine. Whitey to this says, hey, I staked this trip, it's my investment, and I'm gonna handle the deal with the dead guy, so give me the frickin' head. Mark argues, hey, I'm the one that can speak to the dead, not you. Whitey, he eventually loses his cool and he shoots Mark dead. Whitey then picks up the head of Blackbeard and continues trying to do the exchange. He slowly approaches Blackbeard's body. He's holding out the head to give over to Blackbeard. but the headless body of Blackbeard has a sword in his hand, and he swings and slices at Whitey, killing him. With Whitey dead, the body of Blackbeard picks up his severed head and places it back on his body. By now, finally, Hellboy and the local historian, Earl Reeds, have arrived. Hellboy gets out of the boat and confronts Blackbeard. Hellboy asks the pirate, "Hey pal, who are the dead guys?" Blackbeard responds, "I got no idea. Some funny little men who should have known better, it seems. But you look like an agent of Old Scratch himself, and I'll be damned if I let the devil drag me down to hell on the tip of his tail, now that I'm finally whole again." Hellboy to this says, "I don't know about hell, old-timer, but I'm definitely not leaving here without the head." Blackbeard responds, "Well, matey, I ain't seen the ass side of a decent squabble in nearly 300 years. Let's make this count for something, shall we?" They square off, and Blackbeard shoots Hellboy in his shoulder. While all of this fighting is going on, Abe Sapien is on the beach, and he is watching all of these long-dead sailors begin to wake up and walk to shore. One of those dead sailors that is wearing a cloaked robe tells Abe that they all have unfinished business with Blackbeard. That old snake's finally clawed his way back into the world, and he's got some debts to settle. Abe radios into Hellboy and says, "Hellboy, you there? I think something's happening." As Hellboy and Blackbeard continue fighting on the beach, eventually the dead sailors catch up with them, they grab Blackbeard and drag him screaming down into the sea. In the aftermath, Abe Sapien catches back up with Hellboy. Abe comments, "Well, that was something." Hellboy responds, "Everybody loves a pirate." Hellboy, Abe, and the historian Earl Reeds then head off back home. Next short story is A Christmas Underground, art by Mike Mignola, colors by James Sinclair. This story is set in the year 1989. Hellboy travels to England to visit a dying woman on Christmas Eve. Before visiting the dying woman, he talks to a priest who is there to give the dying woman her last rites. The priest tells Hellboy that the woman had a daughter named Annie Hatch, and she went missing 5 years ago. Hellboy then goes and talks to the dying woman. The dying woman asks Hellboy to give a Christmas present from her to her daughter, Annie, the one that has been missing. Hellboy agrees to do it, and as Hellboy leaves the room, we see that the old dying woman delusionally believes that Hellboy is Santa Claus. After all, it is Christmas Eve, and Hellboy's skin is red, like Santa's suit. Hellboy, he then walks on the premises and goes to an old grave nearby. Hellboy enters the grave, and it actually leads to a giant underground hidden mansion. And inside that mansion, Hellboy finds Annie there. Annie's memory is hazy, and she almost seems ghostly. Hellboy questions how she wound up here. Annie answers that there was a secret garden where she used to hide and play with her animals. And she found a mouse there one day with silver eyes. She followed the mouse, and he led her down into the ground. And for a while she was lost. And then a soothing voice spoke to her out of the dark. It told her, "Abide with me and be my bride, and thou shalt have thy heart's desire." And somehow she ended up marrying this dark prince down there in the ground. And he gave her a ring to wear which bound her to him. Annie continued to live under there. And slowly, as her family members began to die in real life, they would join her and come to live with her there. Hellboy then questions Annie, saying, "Alright, listen to me now. This is Christmas Eve. Does that ring a bell to you?" Annie, she's so confused by living down here all these years, she doesn't even remember the concept of Christmas. Hellboy, responding to Annie's confusion, replies, "Christmas Eve, come on!" Annie's still confused. Hellboy tells Annie, "I spoke to your mom tonight. She sent me to find you. She wanted you to have this. It's a present. Merry Christmas." Hellboy gives the gift to Annie. It is a cross necklace. As soon as Annie holds the gift in her hands, the ring on her finger begins to unwind, and it becomes a lizard, thus somehow breaking this Dark Prince's hold that he has had over Annie. Although now all the ghoulish family members that died and came to live with them underground come to life, and they start attacking Hellboy. Hellboy, he fights off these ghouls, punching some of their heads clean off their bodies. And eventually, this Dark Prince himself attacks Hellboy. This Dark Prince appears to be a large mouse-like monster. If we remember, Annie said she followed a small mouse down here into the ground. So that must be this same creature. So Hellboy, he fights this mouse-like evil prince. Meanwhile, Annie, who apparently has been dead for the last several years, now that she no longer wears that ring, her spirit is free to leave her body. And Annie's spirit goes and visits her mother as she dies. The mother, seeing her daughter's spirit, asks, "Annie, is that you?" Annie responds, "I'm here. Don't be afraid. I'm with you now." The spirit of Annie then lights the house aflame. Meanwhile, Hellboy and this mouse prince are still battling. Their fight has led them to the surface above ground, and as they are fighting on the surface, the nearby church bells start ringing. It is midnight mass, and the church bells seem to damage the evil mouse prince, and he slowly starts to die. In the aftermath, Hellboy rejoins the priest he was talking to earlier. They are both outside, and they watch the house burn down. Hellboy asks, "How did the fire start?" The priest answers, "I didn't have anything to do with that. I was with the old woman till the ground began to shake. I came out here, and next thing I knew, the place was in flames." Hellboy responds, "It's alright. Fire is the best thing for her now. Let it burn. You know, she was a nice old lady. She saved her little girl, and she thought I was Santa Claus, so Merry Christmas, Miss Hatch, wherever you are." Next short story is Dr. Carp's Experiment. Artwork by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1991. Hellboy is sent to assist a BPRD agent named Paula Raskin and her team. They are at a haunted house. The house was built in the year 1874, and it was owned by a Dr. Carp. This Dr. Carp was the supposed Grand Master of the Golden Lodge, the Heliopic Brotherhood of Ra. This Brotherhood of Ra was a secret society dedicated to preserving ancient and secret knowledge. This organization would later show up frequently in the Sir Edward Grey spin-off comics. So this Dr. Carp, he then disappeared in the year 1902, and his house then passed on to his sister until she died in the year 1911, and the house has been empty ever since. Over the years, the BPRD have sent psychics and other investigators to check the house over, but nothing was ever reported. Until recently, though, a new blueprint of the house was found, and it revealed that there was a hidden basement in the house. The BPRD decided that it would be best that Hellboy investigate it in case something dangerous was inside, as he would be best equipped to deal with it. So Hellboy, he is about to enter this sealed room that has not seen the light of day for close to 100 years. Now apparently, back in the 1800s, this Dr. Carp, while we are not fully sure the nature of his work, he perhaps developed some sort of experiment to manipulate time and space in order to communicate with or control ancient beings. And as soon as Hellboy in the present day enters this sealed room, he encounters remnants of Dr. Carp's experiment, including whatever time machine he developed. And due to the residual energy from the machine or Dr. Carp's tampering with malevolent forces, Hellboy somehow gets sucked into a temporal vortex and is brought back into the past. And in the past, Hellboy encounters this Dr. Carp and his followers, and he is there then with them. And they are in the middle of conducting dark rituals and attempting to unleash otherworldly creatures. 2 of Dr. Carp's men then attack Hellboy with electrified spears. Hellboy, he gets zonked out a bit, and while subdued, Dr. Carp extracts some of Hellboy's blood, and then he injects Hellboy's blood into a chimpanzee strapped to a table. The chimp being injected with Hellboy's blood starts freaking out, and he breaks the bonds he was in. And then the chimpanzee quickly changes into some sort of demonic creature, and the demonic creature attacks the men in the room, until eventually one of Dr. Carp's men is able to shoot the demonic chimp, but not before the men are all badly wounded. Hellboy, he hits the floor and passes out, and he wakes back up in the same room covered in cobwebs in the present day. Hellboy, he is really confused. He asks Pauline Raskin, how long was he in that room for? Pauline tells him, you were just in there for 2 seconds. Hellboy, he doesn't know what to think about that. In the room are the long dead bodies of Dr. Carp and his men and the dead demon chimp. Some BPRD agents enter the room. They investigate and they determine that this Dr. Carp must have died there and that his sister had the room bricked up. Hellboy, he searches the room and he looks down and he picks up a syringe, and the syringe contains traces of his blood. That's it for that short story. Kind of intriguing, the whole time manipulation stuff going on there. Our next short story is called The Ghoul, or Reflections on Death and the Poetry of Worms. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1992. Not much to this story. This Pauline Raskin BPRD agent meets with a woman named Miss Stokes who believes her husband is out late. Pauline shows the old woman a picture of her husband out at a cemetery. The old woman is confused by it. We then jump to that cemetery and we see the old man. Turns out he's a ghoul, long dead. Hellboy confronts him, they fight. Eventually Hellboy kills him. And that's basically all there is to this story. Our next short story is called In the Chapel of Moloch. Art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This is set in the year 1992. In the year 1992, Hellboy travels to Portugal to meet with an art agent who is concerned about his client named Jerry. Jerry is an artist. The agent had even rented an old house with an attached chapel so Jerry could work out of it and use it as his studio space. Jerry, he painted a bit at first when he moved in, but his work was uninspired. He was basically just ripping off an old Spanish artist from the 1800s named Francisco Goya. The painting stopped entirely though a few months ago, and Jerry, he now just stays in bed all day. He seems weak and tired, but at night, almost like a zombie, he enters the chapel and works in there. The art agent takes Hellboy into the chapel and shows Hellboy what Jerry has been working on at night. It is a large statue of a horned monster. Hellboy asks if the agent knows what the statue is of. The art agent mentions that Jerry sometimes calls out the name Moloch at night. Hellboy, he recognizes this name. He explains that this Moloch is mentioned in the Bible and that people sacrificed children to him. Hellboy, he further explores the chapter. He finds a symbol there of the Order of the Knights of St. Hagen, which is an order we heard of in an earlier story in this volume. They were an order of knights that specialized in hunting down witches. Hellboy, he closer investigates the statue. He scrapes the statue a bit with a small tool, and blood starts dripping from the scratch. When Hellboy sees this, he comments, "Yeah, that's not good." Hellboy and the art agent decide to wait in the chapel until dark to see what Jerry does there every night. So later that night, they spot a small, shriveled creature that climbs out of the hole in the floor, and it grabs Jerry, hanging on his back, and it whispers in Jerry's ear. They go over to the statue, and the creature guides Jerry's hands as he sculpts. Hellboy calls out to the creature, and then the creature attempts to flee. By doing this, Jerry seems to break free of his possession. The creature then seems to almost get absorbed into the horn statue, and the horn statue begins to awaken, and it stands, and it is readying to fight Hellboy. The artist, though, Jerry, he's not under this possession anymore. He's no longer in a zombie-like state, but still, he does not want the statue and the creature destroyed. Jerry begs Hellboy to not kill it. He says, "No, don't do it. The paintings, they aren't working." Jerry, he doesn't want the creature harmed, as it has been giving him the inspiration and the skills that he was missing before. He was finally creating some good art, and he didn't want that taken away from him. Hellboy, though, he keeps fighting the creature, and Jerry keeps protesting, yelling, "No!" Jerry's art agent tells Jerry, "You've got to let him smash it, Jerry. It's evil." Jerry to this says, "It's all I've got. It's all I have left." Hellboy, he manages to kill the creature, finally smashing the statue into smaller pieces. The statue is smashed, and its red heart falls onto the floor, and Hellboy shoots it with his gun, fully destroying and killing the creature. Jerry is distraught. He says that he was ruined, and he will never paint again. Hellboy tells Jerry that that's not the worst thing that could happen to him, adding that he should probably give up sculpting, too. Alright, our final short story in this omnibus is Makoma, or A Tale Told by a Mummy in the New York City Explorers Club on August 16th, 1993. Art by Richard Corbin and Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. This story is set in the year 1993. In 1993, in New York City in the Lower East Side, Hellboy is at the New York City Explorers Club, talking to some members there. One of the members recently went on a trip to Africa and brought back a mummy and various other work from his expedition. The various explorers there ask Hellboy if he's ever been to Africa. Hellboy says only once, a long time ago. Apparently in the year 1947, Hellboy went there briefly with Trevor Broom. Hellboy, he tries to remember some of his time there then in Africa, and he remembers when a giant rhino spoke his name, Anyungunrama. After that flash of memory, Hellboy comments to himself, "Geez, how do you forget something like that?" Hellboy, he leaves the explorers and goes to inspect this mummy that they brought back, and eventually the mummy starts speaking with him. The mummy begins telling Hellboy a tale. He beckons Hellboy to travel with him to the Lost City and Tomb of Kings. Hellboy wanders some of these ruins as the mummy tells his story. The mummy tells a story of a man named Makoma. As the mummy tells the story, Hellboy begins to doze off while listening. So the mummy, he's telling this story of this man, Makoma. And in the comic, when we see this Makoma, he is drawn as if he were Hellboy himself. At the end of the story, we will see the real Makoma, who is depicted as an African king. But for now, we will see this Makoma through the lens of Hellboy. And the reason this is done is because this Makoma's own life, in a way, parallels Hellboy's own story, especially the upcoming battle with the Ogdru Jihad. Anyway, so this Makoma, he was born so he could speak, so he named himself, and his name means he who is greatest and without fear. To demonstrate his greatness and that he is without fear, he was cast into a deep crocodile-infested pool. And the next day, all of the crocodiles were dead, and Makoma, he came out of that pool alive and fully grown, and holding in his hand an iron hammer. At first there was celebration, but then the chiefs and elders met with Makoma to discuss the troubles of the land, and they asked him to deal with those problems. So Makoma set out on his journey. Early the next morning, Makoma came across an old woman. The old woman gave him a bag to hold the bones of his enemies, and she told him to carry that bag until he meets her again at the end of the world. So Makoma, he journeyed, he wandered for days, months, years. Makoma's journey had him crossing paths with many giants, who all wanted to fight him upon hearing his name, and Makoma defeated each and every one, making them shrink so small that he was able to place them in the bag that the woman gave him. We see 4 different giants that Makoma beat this way, fighting them shrinking, and then him placing them in his bag. Makoma's next foe was a little bit more difficult, though. It was a fire demon. Makoma managed to defeat it, but the demon, now defeated, tempted Makoma to kill him and take his power and become what he was meant to be. Makoma rejected this, though. He did not want this power. Instead, he constructed a small cage made out of sticks. He shrunk the fire demon down and put the fire demon inside this small cage. Makoma, he continued his journeys and walked on. He walked, and eventually he heard singing. He went to the source of the singing in a town, and he found a man there. The man told Makoma, "Welcome, hero. You have come finally to your journey's end. This is your reward. You've come such a long way. Lay down your burden. Rest." Makoma, he looks at the townfolk, and at first they seem pleasant and peaceful, but upon further inspection, he realizes that the town is really full of corpses, and the singing he heard was in reality the buzzing of 10,000 insects. Makoma tells the man that was asking him to lay down his burdens that he is not interested, and he tries to leave. The man starts begging Makoma, saying, "Do not go! Do not listen to your talking bag! I offer you the endless, dreamless sleep of living death." Makoma still wants to leave, but the man refuses to let him go. He wants to make Makoma his slave. So he summons a whole bunch of ant-men to attack Makoma, and after many days of battling, the man eventually grows annoyed that Makoma is still fighting. He offers to let Makoma go, but only if he will give Makoma the bag holding the giants. Makoma doesn't want to do that, though, as the woman told him to carry it and give it back to her at the end of the world. So Makoma instead decides to trick the man. He tosses the man the bag and says, "Sure, have it, just let me keep this." And Makoma, he's holding the cage of sticks that contains the fire giant inside. So all of a sudden, the man no longer wants the bag, he wants the cage of sticks. He tells Makoma, "Ha! You take me for a fool? Take your nasty bag and give that thing to me." So Makoma does, and he finally leaves, and the man, he inspects the cage of sticks, and it eventually bursts open, releasing the fire demon inside as it burns the man and his town to ashes. Makoma, he continues traveling for days, months, years, until even his great strength wore out. And he finally makes his way back to the old woman from the beginning of his journey, as he has now reached the end of the world. Makoma goes back to the old woman's hut, and he sleeps there. And in his sleep, he is visited in his dreams by the spirits of the great chiefs of Africa, in the form of lions and the great rhino, which is the spirit of Africa herself. When Makoma awakens, he sees a great feast before him, a table of roasted meat and hot wine. Makoma, he ate every last scrap of food. After he is done, he asks the woman, "But where did all this food come from? I didn't see any animals for you to hunt last night." The woman answers, "You have eaten your friends," meaning he ate the giants in his sack. Makoma then looks into his bag and he sees a boy standing there on a pile of bones. The woman reveals to Makoma that the boy had been possessed by the fire demon, but Makoma restored him to life. And the boy will now go on and live long after they are both gone. And the giants, Makoma's friends, were happy to give the last of themselves to him, so he would have the strength enough to end well. Makoma eventually left the woman's hut, and he took his hammer and went out to the end of the world, there to meet his doom. He journeyed on, and he met the dragon, the seven-headed dragon, the Ogdru Jahad. Makoma, thanks to the strength of the giants that he devoured, the two were evenly matched. Neither one could get the better of the other until finally strength failed them both, and they fell together, both dying in battle. Upon Makoma's death, we see that Makoma in the story no longer looks like Hellboy, and now we see the real Makoma, the African king. So with Makoma dying in battle, as well as the dragon, the world was created anew. The bag that was in the witch's house opened and brought forth mountains and rivers and forests and all manner of beasts. The world was created, and lastly emerging from the bag was the boy that we saw in the sack earlier, and he lived on. The story then returns to the mummy in the ruins of the city in that New York City Explorers Club. The mummy tells Hellboy that he was that boy, and he built the city as a monument and tomb for Makoma. And he went on to live for 500 years to have wives and children, but always in the shadow of himself. The mummy, now finishing his story, says, "And now it's done, and now his story's told, and I pray the wind will carry my dust." The mummy then disintegrates, turns to dust, and the dust flies away. Hellboy, not wanting that to happen, says, "Son of a..." And the New York City explorers that were initially with Hellboy at the beginning of this tale see that the mummy has been destroyed and is gone, and they get upset. They ask, "Hellboy, what the hell did you do to my mummy?" And a few days later, Hellboy was banned for life from the New York City Explorers Club for ruining their ancient mummy artifact. And that is the end of the Makoma story arc, which is kind of giving some hints about Hellboy's journey to come. And with that, we end the short story Omnibus Volume 2. The next video in the Hellboy chronology is the Hellboy Omnibus Volume 2, Strange Places, where we will be moving away from these short stories and getting back to the main overarching larger story. But for now, let me go through my final thoughts on this volume. Alright, so that was the second short stories omnibus. So many tales in here. It reminds me a lot of Sandman, how Neil Gaiman would have some volumes that were just a whole bunch of short one-off tales. So I really get that vibe in here. And some of the storylines in Hellboy kind of mirror that overall like mythological vibe that Sandman would sometimes give off. Some of my favorite tales in this one were the Troll Witch. I just like the idea of this witch having this sister, and then she turned into a cow and she died, and the Troll Witch kept her sister's head, and the sister did not get a happy ending in the end. And Hellboy, he didn't even kill anyone in that volume or fight anyone. He just listened to this witch's tale and then followed her instructions. The Goodbye Mister Tod one with the psychic. I just like the idea of Hellboy sort of performing this kind of like exorcism in a way, and making this psychic that was summoning all this shit just get sucked back into him, and then, you think that this guy's been saved, but then his body explodes. So Hellboy kind of succeeded on the mission, but not really. The They That Go Down to the Sea in Ships one, that was the one with Blackbeard. I like the concept of Blackbeard's head being decapitated and then people drinking out of it for years, and then Blackbeard still somehow being alive in a way and wanting to get reunited with his body. Was a cool concept there. The Dr. Carp's experiment story arc, the one where Hellboy travels back in time a little bit and takes part in this experiment in a way, and there's weird time dilation stuff going on. It was just interesting to think about, although maybe a little bit confusing too, that story arc, unfortunately. The Makoma one, the final story in this volume, was kind of intriguing, following this like African mythology and taking this Makoma character and having his story in a way mirror Hellboy's. If you are familiar with Hellboy's overarching story arc that we're going to go through in this series, you can really pick up on a lot of the ways that Hellboy's story is mirroring this other guy's story. So yeah, it was kind of intriguing, although out there a little bit too, with some of the concepts going on with the mythological stuff, but and very intriguing. Overall, I thought the second short stories omnibus here was not as strong or as consistent as the first one. In the first one, I really almost loved almost all the tales in that one. There was a couple maybe I was less into. In this volume, I was a little less enthused by some of them, but overall, still pretty fun. I'm going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back in the future with the second omnibus in the main Hellboy core book. So that should be pretty exciting, and I hope to see you all then there for that.